It's always nice to be sitting opposite a friend, and an unusual one at that, because not only is he a great musician, a great conductor, a great composer, a great orchestrator, written for films, hit records, you name it, he's done it. What's unusual about him is he's a drummer. Brian Bennett, you must have had that said to you a few times.
Many times, yeah. It's a famous thing with drummers. A definition of as a drummer is someone who likes to hang around musicians. That's one of them. And you know, in the old days, even a dance band would be advertised as 16 musicians and a drummer. So we're a bit of a novelty, you know.
You started out as a drummer before moving on to the other things, though, yeah?
Yeah. It came quite naturally. I was always, apparently, according to my mum, banging around on pots and pans, listening to the radio, and I loved listening to dance bands and big bands. That was my passion, yeah.
So on the radio, what station was that then?
There was a station called The Voice of America, a radio station in Tangiers, and it was run by a guy called Willis Conover, and it was called a thing called Jazz Hour. And the signature tune was Take the A Train by Duke Ellington. And it was the Ellington Band, and the drummer was fantastic. And I found out later that it was a guy called Louis Belson, who I met many years later. And that I was hooked. That's what I wanted to do.
This is pre-rock and roll, isn't it, really?
Yeah. This was sort of 1950, 51, 50. Rock and roll was sort of like just about coming together in America. But there was no, the rock thing hadn't started at all. It was big bands. So I wanted to be a big band drummer.
So how did you go about being a big band drummer?
Well, I joined various dance bands at school. There was the Hazelwood Youth Club dance band in Palmer's Green, where I went to school.
So what was in that? What was the instrumentation?
It was, there was two brothers, two saxophones, I think they're Grimston brothers. And there was two tenors, piano, drums, trumpet, guitar, acoustic guitar, no bass player. No bass player. And I went through about 4 or 5 dance bands before I had that rich feeling of someone down the bottom with me playing, you know. And that was the Esquires dance band, which was one of the big dance bands in North London. And yeah, that was a really cool band, and yeah.
So but you borrowed a kit at school, the school kit?
No, I borrowed the school kit, and then I added bits to it. I started off with a snare drum.
Just a snare drum?
Just a snare drum, and a stand, and a pair of brushes. And
how much was that, do you remember?
It was probably about 8 quid. It was a fortune.
Yeah.
It was a fortune. It was an Olympic.
Right.
And I bought it in Charing Cross Road, and then I went back and there was an Olympic bass drum, which was about a tenner. And I bought that a few months later, with paper round money and gig money. And then of course everywhere we used to go by trolley bus, you know. So you'd get on a trolley bus, 629 trolley bus from the top of Farndale Avenue where I lived. And I had a bass drum and a snare drum and a hi-hat and a pair of sticks, you know. You can't come on here with that. You can't come on that bus with it. And then I gravitated to, you know, trains and it was trains and buses and things like that, you know.
You got some toms then after a little while?
No, I didn't have toms much later. I'd actually ended up down the Two Eyes as the house drummer.
Did you?
Yeah, in 1957, 56, 57.
So how did that happen?
Well, there was a guy called Steve Murray, who subsequently changed his name to Wee Willie Harris, and there was a thing called the Great Britain Skiffle competition, and it was run by Stanley Dale, and I played a washboard. They said, "Do you want to play a washboard?" I said, "Play a washboard," you know. So I bought a washboard, and on the back of the washboard there was pictures of Stan Kenton and sort of Duke Ellington and all that sort of thing, you know, because I didn't really want to be a washboard player. But they said, it's 10 quid a week. I said, 10 quid a week. So we went to Ramsgate, and I played washboard in the evening, and I did cherry picking during the daytime in the fields of Kent to make some money up. And I got another bass drum and another snare drum, which was a Premier.
All right.
A ride cymbal and a hi-hat. And after that, I came back to Wee Willie Harris was singing down a place called the Two Eyes Coffee Shop. So I went down there, and I became the house drummer. And we were paid 17 shillings a night. And by that time, I'd sort of left home, and I was doing little tiny jazz gigs. Ronnie's wasn't invented yet, but there were little jazz clubs in town where you could go. And above the Two Eyes, there was a drummer called Tony Crombie, and he used to come down and sort of like say, "I listened to your playing. You know, you're okay. You know, you should do this and this and that."
Who were you playing with in the house?
Well, it was the house. There was a guy called Vince Taylor, who was a sort of an American from Hounslow. He just had the accent, but he looked good, you know. And then there was Tommy Steele was down there. Terry Dean was down there. Yeah. Cliff hadn't arrived yet. Marty Wilde was down there. So I did house drumming down there. And then I joined, and I still only had the bass drum and the snare drum and hi-hat. And then after, and there was a guitarist, great guitarist down there called Tony Sheridan. And it became the Tony Sheridan Trio. And apart from the Two Eyes, we used to, after the Two Eyes, there was a club called Winston's Club. And then there was Churchill's Club. And we used to go off with the trio and do gigs in those places as well. Then there was a TV show was just starting to be put together called Oh Boy Show, which was the show. And they had the Lord Rockingham's 11, which was like a big band with Cherry Wayner on organ. And they wanted a trio to back people like Brenda Lee and Conway Twitty and some of the American artists that came over. So the Tony Sheridan Trio, which was me, Licorice Locking on bass, and Tony Sheridan, with a house band on Oh Boy. So so I did that for a time, and rock and roll wasn't established, it was still a bit of a novelty, and I was still not convinced that that's where I wanted to be. I still wanted to join the Dankworth band or you know, one of the big bands, because I was still into big band playing. And I got a job in my first summer season when I was 16 in Largs in Scotland. And whilst I was in Largs in Scotland,
who was that for? Was that?
It was a band called the Red Peppers, and that was 15 quid a week. Oh. Fantastic.
And Tony Sheridan had moved on.
He'd moved on. He'd gone to Hamburg by that time, and he was hanging out there. And I came back and got my old chair back at the Two Eyes. But whilst I was in Largs in Scotland, Cliff Richard and Tony Meehan and Jet Harris, who I knew from the Two Eyes, and Hank and Bruce had come down from Newcastle, and they'd all got together during this period, you know, 1956, 7 it was, whilst I was away. So I met them when I came back, and I think I played with Hank down there a few times, and then Marty Wilde offered me a job in the Wildcats, and it was a regular job.
Had you seen Marty since the Two Eyes?
No, I hadn't seen him, but I'd seen another guitarist that was down the Two Eyes with me called Jim Sullivan, Big Jim. So Jim Sullivan said, "Look, Marty's looking for a drummer. Do you want to come along?" You know, I said, "Yeah." 25 quid a week. Wow, getting better.
That was big money back.
Big money, 25 quid a week.
What year would this have been?
This is 1957.
It's huge money.
Yeah. So.
Did you buy a tom-tom?
I could get a tom-tom. So I could get a tom-tom. I got two. I tell you what, there was a shop called Drum City. Well, it was actually called the Paramount Drum Shop in Shaftesbury Avenue. And there was a guy there called Ivor Arbiter, who ran it with his dad. And he was great because, you know, in life, every now and again you get people that just seem to always be there for you and help you out when you know. I couldn't afford a drum kit, so I was getting a reputation as being a good drummer. I had a good teacher, got myself a good technique. And
who was your teacher?
It was a guy called Bruce Gaylor. He was American, and he had great chops, absolutely fabulous chops. and he got me through. The Americans have a way of teaching that I'd never heard of before. They made it very logical. You know, when I was sort of rattling through the Macpherson's Rudiments of Music and trying to learn my craft, it was like crotchets, quavers, semiquavers, demi-semiquavers, and it was all the Italian stuff, and it was all a bit of a mystery when I was very young. And this guy just sort of divided it up into, you know, fourths, eighths, 30 seconds, 60, and made it all very logical for me. So he got me reading, and he got me my hands in shape in a short while, you know.
Oh, right.
Bruce Gaylor, best thing that ever happened to me, that was, you know.
So now you're in the Wildcats.
So I'm in the Wildcats, and we go to Philip's recording studio, first recording sessions, and the first record I made was Teenager in Love, which was a big hit for Marty, yeah. And then I did an album with Marty, and Marty and I became close friends and still are.
You went touring?
I went touring, went all over Europe and all over England. Yeah.
So suddenly, completely opposite to the big band jazz, you're now being screamed at.
Yeah, that's right.
Must have been tough.
Tough, yes, it was tough, yeah. It was great because we toured with with John Barry, who had this big old BOAC coach, and it was John who I toured with Marty, and Larry Parnes was the sort of like the big agent, and he had a lot of. He ran everyone. He ran Marty, Billy Fury, Tommy Steele, and all these different acts, and it was John Barry at the back of the coach. He was doing a postal course from Juilliard School of Music in America, and we were discussing orchestration and composition and things like that. And he said, "Well, we're all touring musicians. We can't go to college and learn properly. So postal course is the answer." So whilst I was touring around playing the drums, I was doing postal courses, and I went to I did a course with the Berklee School of Music in America. And when we did a summer season, I would pick up a teacher. We did a summer season in Bournemouth, so I went to the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, picked out a guy called Byron Brooke, who was the lead violinist, and did harmony lessons with him. So I was always sort of, apart from playing the drums, you know, learning all the time, you know. So the Marty thing went on for about 2 years. But one of the good things that happened is Marty now and again went in to make a movie or a musical, and he went in to do Bye Bye Birdie, which is a musical. And the Wildcats were sort of like without a lead singer. So Larry Parnes had brought these two Americans over, and I'd heard their records, they're great records, and one was Gene Vincent and one was Eddie Cochran. So we did the Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran tour. So suddenly I'm playing, you know, the records that I'd heard, like Bebop-A-Lula and Come On Everybody and all that sort of thing, and that was a big thrill, you know. So
how did the Americans, like Gene Vincent and Eddie Cochran, feel about a sort of an English or British band, because they've been used to all the American session guys, haven't they?
Well, that's right. Yeah. Well, I'm not quite sure. I think there was a musicians' union thing at the time where if an American band came over to England, an English band had to sort of do a swap. But with them, I think the budget was they just, you know, they had an English band. That was the deal. So we were thrilled, and they were great. I mean, I didn't realise Eddie Cochran played drums on Come On Everybody. That was him playing. So he taught me all this new way of playing. And it was a different sort of feel. So I learnt a lot from both of them. And he taught Jim how to sort of string the guitar with a sort of like the first string on the third string, so he could bend the notes easier. And he taught us a lot of techniques which were
so there really was a big difference between what the Americans were doing and what the Brits were doing at that time.
Yes, there was. Yeah, America was always. I don't know about you, but from an Englishman in the 50s, America was always great. They had button-down shirts, cool drum kits, and everything was cool about them, you know.
So when was the first time? I'm going to move on a little bit now. Because when was the first time you went to America then? When you actually.
The first time I went to America was with when I joined the Shadows in 1962. I joined them in 61 and went to America in 62, yeah.
So how did you come to join them? Because obviously you met them.
Met them. Well, I was... when I finished with Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, and I decided that I wanted to do session work and I wanted to get into theatre work. So I went into summer season, I became a pit drummer. And the way to learn anything is to sort of throw yourself in. If you want to learn to sight read properly and do things right, go and do pit work. Change your program every week, sight reading, and so that was it.
Can you remember some of the ones you did?
Yeah, I did a summer season. I did the Windmill Theatre with Tommy Steele and Frankie Howard. And
there's a combination.
There's a combination, yeah, fantastic. So, you know, you got sort of, you're sitting there. Pit work is a different thing altogether. You've got to face, the kit's got to be facing towards, you've got to have one eye on the knife thrower, Elizabeth and Collins, and there's Elizabeth going around and things like that. And he's throwing knives at her, so you're in a fast tooth, watching the guitar, knife, whoosh, whoosh. And a knife comes flying at you, you're ducking, and all the funny things that happen in the pit bands, you know. And then I got offered the job from Tony Newley of Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, which was a West End show. I thought, West End, 25 quid a week, in London, don't have to tour anymore, start doing session work. I'd done a few things for Joe Meek and those sort of people. And I'm getting ready. I'm in the pit with Andy White, who was in the pit doing Stop the World. And I got a call from Bruce Welsh. Do you want to join the Shadows? You know, my wife took the call. He said, "Well, he's busy at the moment. You know, we're going in the pit." He says, "Bruce Welsh." You know. I said, "Oh, Bruce." You know, he says, "It's Shadows." I said, "Yeah, I know Shadows." You know. So he said, "We need a drummer like tomorrow because Tony made a swift exit." You know. I said, "Well, I'm just going in to Stop the World. I want to get off." And I said, 25 quid a week. He said, what are you getting? I said, 25 quid a week. He said, "Well, double it." I said, "Okay." 50 quid a week. 50 quid a week.
And this is 1960.
1961.
61.
Fortune. So I said, "Right, I'll see you tomorrow." So I did. I got in. I joined the Shadows the next day. We went up to Blackpool to finish off a summer season. Jet was the bass player. Jet.
How much rehearsal did you have?
I think it was about an hour. I went on stage and just that was it. We tapped through the dressing room and bang, we were on. You know.
Do you remember it?
Yeah. And I remember because I could play. You know, there was no question about can you cut it or not. It was just like I went in there and did it. I knew their records. And we went a very quick rehearsal with Bruce, and I was on stage that night. And then we went on stage the next day and rehearsed it. And then we got on a plane and went to Australia, you know. And then we went to the Far East, and then suddenly I'm in New York, you know, which was fantastic, you know.
Did you ever get to see any of your sort of fave big bands?
Oh, yeah.
In America?
I went to the Metropole Bar, which was just all the things in America you think are going to be sort of like that you see on the movies. But the Metropole Bar was just an old bar, and a Maynard Ferguson band was standing on the shelf behind playing. And I went to Birdland and saw all my heroes.
Did you get to meet them?
No, I was actually quite shy. I mean, my big hero was Buddy Rich, who I used to go and see at Ronnie's every year, and he had a reputation for being awkward, I think is polite. and Ronnie Scott would always sort of say, come round and meet Buddy, you know, and Pete King would sort of, "Come meet Buddy." I said, "No, you know, he's God, you know." And I eventually did meet him, and he was the most charming bloke I've ever met in my life, you know. He was absolutely brilliant, you know. But he was the hero. So yeah, I got to see the bands. And America was fantastic. And Hank and Bruce took me to a place called Manny's, which was the big drum shop. And I got myself a silver Ludwig kit. They bought me a silver Ludwig kit, which I've still got.
You really?
Yeah.
So you came back from America?
Came back from America, and then we went straight into sort of things like making films. And I was doing a bit of writing, a bit of songwriting, and they said, and we did things like pantomimes, which was strange things to do, you know. I didn't like them much, you know. And I was still...
What did you do in the pantomimes?
Well, I was poshy, of wishy-washy, noshy and poshy, you know. And Arthur Askey used to sort of throw me through a mangle, and those pantomimes went on for 4 months.
Yeah.
So I used to get a little bit sort of like, where is this career going now, you know? Because I knew what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a great drummer. I wanted to be a great writer. I wanted to write things, you know. So I didn't quite know where it was going.
And suddenly you're poshy.
And I'm poshy, you know, and I'm going, not going according to plan, you know. So I did some writing, and of course I wrote a couple of the songs, you know, and I was doing my postal course in the pit of the Globe Theatre in Stockton, doing pantomime, and there was a film being written at the time, called Summer Holiday. And we'd all had to get on this red bus and go to Athens, you see. So I'm sitting there doing my postal course in the pit. And Bruce came up and said, they want a song, they want a title song. I said, oh, great. He said, do you want to write a song? I said, I'm doing my postal course, I'm going to be a composer. Crap, big deal, you know. So he said, come on, and he just started ringing the car. So he just said, we're all going on a summer holiday, we're going where the sun shines brightly, we're 251, we're going where the sea is blue. Figured bass I was in. Yeah. Let's see if it's true. We're all going diddle. That's nice, that's so great. Is that all right? Right, I get back to my postal course, you know, and it was all done in about an hour.
Is it really? It wasn't your first efforts at writing, though,
no,
was it?
I'd written some instrumental stuff, but it was the first Cliff Richard hit that I'd.
How did that feel when suddenly you recorded it? When did you record it?
That would have been 1962. Yeah.
EMI? Did you do it at EMI?
EMI.
You did it at EMI, and
EMI.
you recorded it. Did you realise I know it sounds a bit hackneyed, but did you realise you'd written a hit?
No, and even when it was a hit, I was still in a strange frame of mind where I didn't know really who I was, you know, because I still wanted to be the composer and the big band player. So
Isn't that funny?
it was quite strange. It wasn't sort of like, I've written Summer Holiday. I mean, now I go, hey, you never guess who wrote that. I wrote Summer Holiday.
What about your first orchestrations? When did they come about?
That was in the 60s. The most memorable one I remember is a thing called Silvery Rain, which is a lovely song that Hank Marvin composed, and Norrie gave me the job of doing that. And it was a lovely song. It was all about sort of hidden meanings of insecticide and things like that. And it was a silvery rain, and the silvery rain was the poison in that, you know. And it was a really deep thing. So I got highly involved, and the outro was about 3 minutes long, you know, and it all had sort of hidden meanings of The Last Cuckoo, and I was really totally over the top. You know? It was nothing to do with trying to make a sort of a hit record. It was like getting involved in orchestration.
Yeah.
And it was Jim Sullivan was on Spanish guitar. It was Spanish guitar, harp, and orchestra. And I really enjoyed doing it, but I got a taste of what it was like to conduct intricate orchestral things, which led me on to film writing and being interested in writing for pictures. You know.
What was the first film you got given?
The first film was a thing called Terminal Choice, and which was with David McCullum, Ellen Barkin, and Joe Spano.
Right.
And
how did that come about?
It came about with, it was a good friend of mine, a great musician, John Scott, had the film, and he was doing the film, and then he was offered a bigger film. I mean, a real big Kirk Douglas film it was. he said, "I got this film, and would you like to do it?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You can do it, can't you?" I said, "Yeah." So I went to Toronto to meet the director, and it was made in Toronto. And I did it, and it was like seat of your pants, the first one, big movie. And the producer was Keith Cavell, who I believe you've worked with anyway.
I have indeed, yeah.
And from that, it was successful, and I got another movie via Keith Cavell.
Is this your first time with all the timings and all the bits and pieces and doing all that?
Well, yes, it was, yeah. Yeah, and I'd got books about it. But there's nothing quite like being thrown in and into a sort of like click track, and it was before computers locked up automatically. You used to sort of have streamers, and it was a stopwatch and that, And but I'd read about it, but it was like being a session musician. I threw myself in at the deep end, like going into pit music.
Yeah.
So I just had to throw myself in and.
Do you remember going and seeing the film when it was finished?
Yeah.
Pleased?
No, couldn't hear the score, but I didn't realise that your music is to make the film look good. And in those days, they wanted it on 4 tracks, so they had control of whether the percussion was up and down. It wasn't a stereo mix.
And then the sound effects came in.
And the sound effects, I suddenly realised that the sound effects men were another breed apart, Now I know how it works now, And then through those movies, I got other work with films. But in the course of the time sequence, we're coming up to sort of 1968 now, and the Shadows actually broke up,
I was going to say, because things started to change in the 60s, musically, the whole guitar sound, because Shadows was a guitar band, and the whole guitar sound started to change with people like Clapton and Beck and that coming in, which happens every time. It happens in that. I'm not going to ask you. Obviously, you'd made a couple of bob. You'd done all right. Did you not think, I'm now going to form the Brian Bennett Big Band and do what I really wanted to do? Did you ever do that?
I sort of did it halfway. I made an album, and I made an album called Change of Direction. And Alan Skidmore on tenor, Alan Hawkshaw on organ.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a good band, and we did some standards, and I wrote some pieces.
Which year was this?
This was 1967, 66, 67. And not a lot of people sort of like played it, because it was jazz, and it was jazz rock, and jazz rock hadn't really happened, So it was something that I was trying to find a language that would that I could play and people would listen to. And then I did another one called Illustrated London Noise, and then I did a couple of gigs, and then the band broke up. The Shadows broke up.
How did the Shadows break up?
It crumbled, like most bands do.
Was that because fashion was changing? Or?
No, it fell to pieces in the dressing room. We just had enough of each other. No, I mean it happens.
Oh yeah.
And it had to happen because it just couldn't go on the way it was. It was just everyone was different. There was internal strife within the band, like there is. It was quite a natural thing. So we just went, we've had enough. Really, we can't do this anymore. It's not fun. It's not fun anymore.
Because it was very unusual in as much as it was a band with a lead singer who was also successful on his own, and the band was equally as successful on his own. I can't really think of any other time that's happened.
No.
Quite.
Not like that. And of course, in the late 60s, we were touring mainly on our own. Cliff was doing his own thing. I was conducting for Cliff now and again, but then the band just broke up. It finished. Yeah.
So you left that. You did a bit of the semi-half big band stuff.
Yeah.
And did you sort of did you have a plan of what you wanted to do?
Well, I sort of had a plan, and then Cliff phoned me up and said, "Would you be my musical director and form the Brian Bennett Orchestra? And we're going to Japan and Russia." Oh, great, you know. So, and it was amusing because there was an Oliver Nelson big band arrangement, a thing called Going Up North, big band, and I thought, oh, great, I'll open the show with that, you know. Ba ba da 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 ba da da da, wrong, totally wrong. This is Cliff Richard, but I did it anyway.
What did Cliff say?
Hey?
What did Cliff
Well,
say?
they just sort of like, what's he doing, and can you put a bit of backbeat in it? And it was like, we left it alone in the end. But when we went to Japan, we picked a brass section up in Japan. Of course, they were all jazz fans, so they were sort of practicing. They loved the opening few numbers, till Cliff got on, And then I took a band to Russia. It was the first band that actually went behind the Iron Curtain, and it was the period of the early 70s. So it was Cold War and people looking behind doors and things like that. And who's that staring at you? Very.
Did they know who you were?
Yeah, they did. But there was sort of. It was a strange atmosphere, there was a lot of politics going on, But we had a great time. We had a marvellous time there.
So you came back from Japan and Russia.
Yeah.
And we're now into what?
We're now into the 70s,
yeah.
And I started doing session work, and as a drummer.
So almost a bit of a circle, really.
A full circle. What I should have been doing in 1961 instead of joining things, I was now doing in 1971.
But with a serious reputation.
Well, I had a good reputation, and I got picked up. There was fixers that booked me on regular things, and you'd work from 10 till 10, and then there was the greedy hour from 8 till 9, which was where they did the jingles.
Yeah.
And I was suddenly Charlie Katz's blue-eyed boy, and did 10 years session work I worked from people like Ken Dodd to Ella Fitzgerald to Richard Harris to Rock Hudson.
You did Rock Hudson?
I did an album with Rock Hudson, would you believe? Couldn't believe it.
I mean, the interesting thing for people who don't know, the fixers were the people who fixed the sessions, and
Yeah.
there was, I think the three main guys was David Katz, Charlie Katz, and Sid Sachs.
That's
really,
right, yeah.
Who were the main three.
They were.
And I was in David's camp.
Okay.
And it tended to be they didn't like each other very much, David and Charlie.
No.
So if you worked for David, you did very little for Charlie.
That's
unless you were specifically asked for. And
Specially asked for.
Yeah. Well, because Charlie did have a bit of a parrot voice, didn't he?
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story off air about that.
Okay.
That's another thing. So you did this. Did you not miss being on the road?
No.
Not at all.
No, I didn't really. No, hotel life in those days, the hotels were sort of like ham sandwich and kitchen closes at 9. It wasn't like it is now. Yeah. And just travelling generally. I mean, I'd done it for 10 years with the Shadows.
Yeah.
And we'd been around the world. We'd been Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada.
You'd done it.
Done it. And
were you married by then?
I was married, and I had a family. So I had a son and a daughter, and a house in North Finchley. So it was sort of like coming back to where I wanted to be. I was doing the odd bit of writing and session work. And one of the most important people I met during that late 70s period doing session was Steve Gray, who was one of the big session guys at the time. And we were good friends, and he introduced me to a man called Robin Phillips, who ran KPM Library. And library music was a thing where producers and directors who wanted to make a TV show used library music. They couldn't afford to commission a composer. So we formed a little band with Dave Richmond, Duncan Lamont, Steve Gray and myself. And we used to sort of like write, and play for each other at KPM Studios in Denmark Street. we eventually sort of got used to being on our work was being used on a TV show called The Sweeney with Dennis Waterman, and Dennis became a friend of mine. So the writing was coming on, and I suddenly started getting commission work, and Robin Phillips was the guy that believed in me and pushed me towards TV writing and things like that. So he's a very important person in my career, you know, and you know, a changing point.
So what was some of the TV stuff you did?
Mainly The Sweeney, but anything that was sort of, there were so many. There were jingles as well. I remember one session we did was, he asked me to conduct members of the LSO. We got the 80 of the LSO at Abbey Road. He wanted something. We all had a brief. It was either drama, corporate stuff, either comedy stuff, different genres of music. And one of them was like big, pompous, orchestral, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it was corporate.
Yeah.
So I'm standing in front of the LSO and you know, and so nervous, you know, but as you know, you've only got to do that with the LSO, and it just a unison note. It comes back. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, doesn't matter what you do with them. They're a very sort of, they've got their own internal sort of sound.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did this session, and it was used for the royal wedding.
Right.
So and you never know what's going to happen. You sit there and you're watching sort of Dallas or Knots Landing or the royal wedding or any show, and suddenly you hear your music coming on, you know. And then at the end of the quarter, you get your PRS in, and you suddenly go, shit, you know. And you sort of like you think. And I used to make a fortune out of Dallas.
Really?
Yeah. And a lot of those American sort of type shows. Yeah.
Did you get anything for Countdown?
No. Now, Countdown is a different thing altogether. That's a funny story. Countdown was written by Alan Hawkshaw. And we used to do a thing where, you know, do you want some keyboard? Yeah. Do you want some drums? Yeah, I'll do it for you. You know, so we used to work for each other to do stuff for nothing. He said, I got this quiz program. He says, can you bring your timpani around, you know, because they want a thing at the end. And have you got an old metronome that I can record? And I had my old wooden metronome, you see. I said, yeah, fine, okay. So we went to his house, but my timpani wouldn't go through the door. He had his studio upstairs. So I had to put the timpani on the landing with a microphone down, you know. Tick-tock, 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 and this thing. And we used to take the rip out of each other's.
Yeah.
He used to say, one of his Alan Orchard's things is, have you heard Brian Bennett's latest score? And the answer was probably. Yeah. So I'm doing this thing. I'm going, nice writing, Alan. Yeah, great. And I hit this thing at the end. Boing. And his wife's dog came out of the bedroom where this timpani was and bit me in the ankle, you know. And there's and drew blood, you know. So, but I didn't get paid for that, you know. But that's one of the funny little things that I did, yeah. Countdown.
So, moving on a little bit further, suddenly shadows start to come back in fashion again, but you've not yet got back together, have you?
No. We got back together in 1975 for a one-off, which was the Eurovision. And they said, you want to come back and do Eurovision? So we said, okay. By that time, John Farrar had come to England from Australia, and John and Hank and Bruce had formed this Marvin Welsh and Farrar band, and which was a lovely band, all vocals. But of course they'd go on stage and the first thing that they'd shout out is, give us Apache, you know, and give us Wonderful Land. You know, English people won't let you stop being who you are. They won't let you move. So we did, we did the Eurovision.
How was the Eurovision?
It was great. It was just great fun, because we weren't building.
It was back then, wasn't it?
Huh?
It was back then.
It was. It was great, and it was fun. And you had 6 songs, and then we just had a good time, really, you know. And then we thought, well, we can't go on to Eurovision without doing a couple of concerts. We can't just go on cold in front of all those people. So we did 6 dates. Well, of course, we hadn't been on stage for like 10 years, so we walked out on stage, and there was a standing ovation, you know, and we didn't realise how the audience, how affectionate they were towards us.
I think sometimes musicians tend to forget that word, affection.
Yeah. And it wasn't anything to do with money at all. It was to do with the love that they had for, you know, part of their history. So we did a couple of gigs, and that went on and off, actually. Through the 80s, we got a record deal, and we did a record of Argentina, which was a hit. Suddenly, we're back on the road again, you know.
How was that, going back on the road again, doing?
Well, it was great fun, of course, because we didn't have to prove anything. I was going to say we'd grown up, and we didn't have any differences. But of course, after another 10 years, the same thing happened as happened in the 60s. We just you know, got on each other's tits, you know, which happens. It happens. We were all different again. And there's me doing. I'm doing TVs in the dressing room. I'm not doing my postal courses anymore. I'm actually doing scores. So I'm doing sort of like I'm backstage before a sound check doing a Ruth Rendell mystery. I did 15 years of the Ruth Rendell mysteries, and half of them were done in hotel rooms. I'd come off stage. I have a black coffee, get in the car, drive overnight to the next hotel, set up my screen and my portable keyboard player, and do a score till about 9 o'clock in the morning, and then have a kip, do the show, and drive through the night, you know, so there was miss the traffic, which of course nearly killed me, you know, which is silly, you know.
So you broke up again?
Yeah.
And so what year are we now looking at, roughly?
We're sort of, I suppose, 80...
Late 80s,
Late 80s, yeah.
Mm.
Late 80s, yeah.
So what were your thoughts then? I'll go back to sessions, was it, or what?
Well, I didn't want to hadn't handle, and my writing had taken off now. I was doing a lot of commission work. I did a lot of stuff for BBC Bristol, which was with a wonderful producer called Peter Crawford. Mm-hmm. And he had a programme, this will get you back to the pigeonhole thing. He did a programme called Nomads of the Wind, it was about the history of the Polynesian people. It was all about the He'd been in the Pacific for 2 years filming, and he'd heard a bit of library music that I'd written for Robin Phillips, and it was called The Sea, and he used it as a temp track for his film. And he was looking for a guy called Brian Bennett who wrote a piece of music called The Sea. So he went to the library company, and they said, "Oh no, well he's signed to us. You know, you'll have to use our stuff. You know." And I got the word that he was looking for me. So I phoned up BBC Bristol. I said, "My name is Brian Bennett. I believe you're." He said, "Oh, Brian Bennett, the composer. Brian Bennett, the composer." Hadn't a clue about the Shadows, you see. So he came all the way from Bristol to meet me in my studio in Hertfordshire. And we sat there and we looked at the pictures and all that sort of thing. And he sent me a couple of scenes to try out. Big orchestral type of sound, you know. And he came, and that's great. And his wife went out the back to make a cup of tea. And on my wall there's these gold discs, Shadows gold discs, and pictures of the Shadows and Cliff and that. She said, what do Shadows record here, do they then, you know? I said, yeah. Well, what are you to do with the Shadows? Peter says. I said, well, I used to be in the band, you know. What do you do then? I said, I was the drummer. The drummer with the Shadow. You didn't tell me you were the drummer with the Shadows. I said, Peter, if I'd have told you I was the drummer with the Shadows, and you've been around the Pacific for 2 years making them. Would you entrust a film, a six-part film, to a drummer with the Shadows? And he said, most certainly not. I said, well, there you are. Do you like the music? He said, I love it. And we've become good friends ever since. And I've done every program that he's ever made over the last sort of 10 years when he was at BBC Bristol.
Fantastic. So moving into the 90s.
Yeah.
Interesting era.
It was more Ruth Rendell mysteries. I did a series called The Knock. I did a series called Murder in Mind. And I started working with my son, who's a great musician, Warren, and he'd done bits and pieces for me when he was much younger, and he indeed actually
playing keyboards.
He's a keyboard player, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, he's a keyboard player, guitarist, drummer. He does it all. He's very good. So, you know especially when you bring your son into your profession, there is a sort of a who's the kid,
yeah.
Christ, yeah. So we had a bit of that, and I tried to sort of say, well, this is my partner. No, that didn't sound right. This is Warren anyway. So we had that for a time, and now, of course, he's his own man, and he's got his own clients and all that sort of thing. And he ended up by doing a series called London's Burning.
Big series.
And in one of the episodes, the lady firefighter, it was her birthday or some celebration, and she wanted to go to a jazz club and sing a jazz number. So Warren said to me, would you play the drums? I said, yeah, sure, yeah, great. So I got the kit set up, turned up, and the producer's standing there, and the director's standing there, and the producer says to the director, who's the old guy on the drums, So he said, it's his dad. Oh, God, not his dad. And I understood exactly, the problem that he'd had, and he looked at me. So that was a funny moment.
Shadows, huge in the 60s, big through even in the 70s on the second sort of Reformation. Here in the 2000s, suddenly you're going to be playing at like bigger venues than you've ever played before in your life.
I know.
I mean, we're talking huge stadium venues. The Shadows have never done stadiums.
Never.
So how are you preparing for that?
Vigorously. I realise that was the enormity. I mean, playing in a big place, you've got to be just broad strokes and no tricks. You just because it's big.
But when you were asked to come together to do this, did anybody say the size of venues you'd be doing?
Yeah.
They do.
Well, the O2 is the first. They opened the box office about a couple of weeks ago, and it went in an hour. So they put another one on. Now, I've never been to the O2, but it's huge. It's big. So I'm looking forward to it in a strange sort of way.
I mean, you must have all sat round and talked about how.
Yeah. Well, we have, and we are now, doing it. We've just finished. The first thing we did was the Royal Variety Show.
Yeah.
Which we did, and again, we hadn't worked together for years. Cliff and the Shads together, separately, yes, but put the two together, and something happens. It's the sort of the sum of the parts come together, and you got Cliff Richard and the Shadows, which was the first English successful pop band, really.
Yeah.
And we got the warmth of the audience came bang up at us, and that sort of like they like us, which you forget.
The affection thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the affection thing, and I'd forgotten that. So that was great. So we know it's going to work. The thing now to do is to try and get my chops back in shape. And
how many shows do you reckon you'll do?
Well, at the moment we're sort of talking about 15. But then it's going so well that they will probably talk about will we go to Europe? It's a possibility we go to Europe and carry it on.
And then Australia.
And then Australia, who knows? And we did everyone has to be insured against sort of this and this and that. There's sort of like there's terrorist acts and sort of like medicals and things like that. Things that we never thought of in the early days. What? And they're saying, if we take this to Europe, we may have a problem. You know, why? Well, the drummer will be 70. Have you got a problem with that? I said, well, I don't know. Well, we'll wait and see.
What's interesting is suddenly you're going back out on tour again, but probably the biggest tour ever.
Ever, yeah. It will, yeah.
All the things you said you'd had enough of doing.
Yeah.
You're back out doing it again.
Yeah.
Your life is a continual spiral of circles,
isn't it? Yeah.
So I look forward to speaking to you when you come back and say, what the bloody hell are you going to do now?
What do you do now? Yeah.
What a career.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.